this video, we're going to take a look at how we can make the submenu wider than the menu bar. So by default, the menu bar bounds the submenu. That means that this submenu, when it's full width, it can't be any wider than this top black bar here. Now that's important because otherwise your submenu might expand beyond your content area and it might not look good, and for a variety of reasons, this is the default. But there are some instances where we obviously would want the submenu to be wider than the menu bar. So let's take a common example where we have a right-aligned menu bar. So this might be in a layout where the logo is aligned to the left and the menu bar is aligned to the right. So we can simulate that by changing the menu bar position to the right. And so now you can see our submenu is still bound to this menu bar, but the menu bar is much smaller, so it compresses the submenu and doesn't look very good. And in fact, say you had an example where you only had one or two submenu items, you might not get a mega menu at all, in the sense that there wouldn't be enough room to have multiple columns and they would automatically stack. So in cases like these, we want the submenu to no longer be bound by the menu bar. So there's a setting for that right in the control panel. We'll go down to submenus and then change bound submenu to. By default, it's bound to the menu bar, and we can change that to unbounded. So when we select unbounded, that means that the menu bar will no longer restrict the width of the submenu. Instead, the next relatively positioned element in the theme's layout will bound the submenu. Or if there isn't a relatively positioned element, it will expand to the extents of the viewport. So in this case, let's save these settings, and we'll see that if we refresh the page, now the submenu expands to the extents of the viewport. And the reason that is there's no wrapper around this menu that's positioned relatively. Now, in most cases, you don't actually want this to happen. In most cases, we would want this to be bound to the inner content area so that the extents of the submenu line up with the extents of your centered content like most sites have. So in that case, what we can do is add a relatively positioned wrapper in order to bound it. So right now, the submenu extends this far. Let's go ahead and figure out what the wrapper is here. You can see that we actually have a div that's wrapping this menu called content wrapper, and it's not bounding the submenu. Obviously, if we look at the submenu, it is going beyond that container, but we can make this container bound it simply by telling it to display its position relative. So what we would do is we would write a new style, and we would just say position relative. And now you can see immediately the menu is now bound within that content wrapper container. So you can do this for any element on your site. All you do is you unbound the submenu, and then you look for the container that is the width that you'd like the submenu to be, and make sure that the position of that container is set to relative. And then once you've got this written, you just copy it, and to apply it, you can just go into the control panel under general settings and paste this under custom styles in the CSS tweaks, save that, and then it would apply. All right, so let's look at a second example. A lot of times what you'll see in themes is there will be a wrapper on the menu. So in this case, I have an example set up here where we have a wrapper called main menu, and it surrounds UberMenu. And what can happen is that the theme might position this element relatively, and that would bound the submenu. So let's just recap. We've unbounded our submenu, so it's expanding the full width. But let's say instead the theme has a style such as this, where it sets its main menu to floated right and positioned relative. Now what that's going to do is bound the submenu to the same width as the menu bar. Now it's not the menu bar bounding the width, it's that wrapper, but the wrapper is exactly the same size. So when you have a situation like this, choosing that unbounded setting doesn't actually make a practical difference. There is a difference in that this menu is no longer actually the boundary, but in the end, there is no difference as to what you see. So when you have a situation like this, and you see that the wrapper is positioned relatively, then in order to overcome that, you need to just change the position of this to static. So generally, you don't want to edit the theme styles, so you would just write a new style, and you would write main menu position static, and that would allow you to expand the submenu again. So with that static position there, you can see that it is completely unbound. It extends to the viewport width. And if you remove that and it's position relative, it's bound to the main menu. And if we unbound it again and then bound it to a different div instead, you can see we can bound it to the content area. So just to recap, the setting in the control panel allows you to choose whether the submenu will be bound to the menu bar or not. But once you choose that, once you unbound the submenu, it can be bound by a container element in your theme. That is, whichever the next ancestor item is that is positioned relatively. If that item is exactly the same width as your menu bar, changing the bound to setting will not make a difference. But you can easily set your own bounds by setting the various containers to either position relative to create a boundary or position static to have that wrapper not create a boundary. And that's all there is to it.